it's always catch up later on. Should we?
That sounds good.
Okay. Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Wei Sang, Chairman of Cambridge Chinese Community Center. Welcome you all to today's meeting. Thank you very much for joining us, and wish you all have an enjoyable evening. As you may have known, this is the third election meeting we had organized this year. The first one was with the candidates from Labour Party and then Conservative. Today, it's our great pleasure and honor that we have 4 candidates from Lib Democratic Party with us. Welcome. First of all, I would like to briefly introduce our Chinese community and the community center to you, in case you don't know much about our community. The Chinese community is the largest ethnic minority group in Cambridge. According to the census of 2011, near 5,000 Chinese live in Cambridge alone. I believe that the size of our community has increased a lot after 10 years. Probably the size has doubled. Cambridge Chinese Community Center is a charity set up in 1997. Every year, we organized some big celebrations, such as the Chinese New Year, Dragon Ball Festival, Mid-Autumn Festival, and Christmas. I hope we will see you guys in the near future in some events. Before the pandemic, the center opened every Sunday from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. We had children and adult classes, regular seminar, and exercise. Hopefully, the pandemic will over soon, and we can back to normal. All our events and activities are open to everyone and have attracted many local people. George is our regularly participant. George. Our community is an active member among Cambridge communities. We participate activities organized by other communities too. During the pandemic, Cambridge Chinese Community Center has donated over 50,000 face masks to hospital, care homes, school, police, ambulance, local residents, etc. We have also donated 5,000 pounds to hospitals. There were many individual donations too. Now I would like to invite our Lib Dem candidates introduce themselves and their plans if they win the election. So who would like to speak first?
Aidan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, yes, happily, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I'll just introduce myself a little bit and talk about the plans. Obviously, there's some overlap with the plans for the county council and the city council. So I'll try and talk about the things that are more relevant for the mayor. So I grew up in Huntingdonshire, sort of to the west of Cambridge. Although I came to school in Cambridge, to a comprehensive school, which is now an academy called St Bede's. And then went on to university, and now live in South Cambridgeshire with my family. I have 2 children who are at Melbourne Village College. And one of the most exciting things about Melbourne Village College is that they teach Mandarin as a compulsory subject for all children from the year 7. And so my children have now done 4 years of Mandarin and really love speaking the language, and will be doing their GCSEs and then hopefully going on for A-levels. I'm also the councillor for my area, for the villages in my area, and I'm now the deputy leader of South Cambridgeshire District Council since 2018. And we've in South Cambridgeshire, we've been able to do sort of some of the things that I really went into politics to do, like build more affordable housing. So we now have doubled the amount of council housing that we're building. To do things to protect the environment, to increase biodiversity. We've done some things like welcoming in refugees, a very small number, but nevertheless a very significant thing for us, welcoming some vulnerable refugees, and a range of other things, especially that's supporting our sort of communities in South Cambridgeshire. For the mayoral election, so the mayor, as I'm sure you'll have heard from the other candidates, has quite a lot of responsibilities around transport and housing, and also skills and training in the economy. I think the way that the mayor has run things, and we've missed a huge opportunity that I think we need to take now to make our area, the whole of Cambridge and Peterborough, greener and fairer. For example, making transport much more sustainable, supporting making better cycle paths, really good quality, and really integrated into a good network, so that you can rely on that. Taking local control over buses. And then there's the metro system, which we might come back to a bit. This idea of having some tunnels, which I think is the wrong way to go. It's extremely risky and going to take too long. But there are possibilities to do something quicker that does introduce a really good system of mass rapid transport into Cambridge on the surface, done quickly. If we sort of rethink how some of the spaces in the city works, I think there's a possibility there. Then on the environment, we need some action now on climate change. There's lots of plans in place. I think there's not the political will and the sense of urgency there. The combined authority was given some housing funding from the government, and has been managing that extremely badly. There's two particular problems. One is that they haven't been delivering affordable housing quickly enough, and so they've now had £45 million of housing money withheld by the government. And the other is this Palmer's got this idea of loaning money to developers and getting a small number of houses back that he can sell at this £100,000 house idea. But the real problem is the lack of affordable housing across the whole range of types of housing. So rental in particular, there's not enough of a sort of range of house sizes. So I would refocus the housing. And then on skills in the economy, as we come out of the pandemic, we've got to really think about how we make the recovery greener, and focus on good, skilled, long-term jobs, especially in those areas where there's there's traditionally been less good, well-paid, and skilled jobs north of the county and Peterborough. So, for example, in areas like agri-tech, modular house building, and renewable energy, and sort of help that along, as well as a sort of business investment that we've got through the combined authority. I would create a UCAS-style apprenticeships brokerage service, so to really encourage apprenticeships. At the moment, a lot of smaller businesses really want to take on apprentices, but are sort of held back by the complexities of the system. In my role on the Greater Cambridge Partnership, we did some work with Cambridge businesses, and that if the local authority can support businesses through those complexities of the system, they're really keen to take apprentices. But then on the other side, young people who might be looking for apprenticeships really don't know how to find them, and it's a real minefield. Simplify that, and then another problem that we've identified is the lack of careers advice through school and beyond, so I would invest in that to create a really good careers advice service that in particular brings in businesses, business people, and sort of people from the university into schools throughout the sort of life of the pupil so that they have sort of several opportunities to sort of think about their future. So that's sort of about raising aspirations and giving people more ideas about what options there are and what would suit them best. So there's a range of things that we can do. The combined authority that I would do as mayor we haven't been doing nearly well enough for the people of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who will be next?
Do you want to toss a coin, Cheney, or shall I go next?
Next, Lucy, is then you'll follow on with county issues, then Anthony and I'll follow up.
Okay, great. Thank you. So my name's Lucy Nethsingh and I am the leader of the Liberal Democrats on Cambridgeshire County Council. I've been a county councillor in Cambridge for 12 years now. My other kind of bits of career history, I was an MEP in the European Parliament where I chaired the Legal Affairs Committee. And before I went into politics, I was a teacher and I specialised in helping children with special educational needs in primary schools. And I have a master's degree in education and psychology from Cambridge University. So the County Council is responsible. One of the things about Cambridgeshire's politics is it's very difficult to know who's responsible for what. The County Council is responsible for roads maintenance, but not long-term or new transport planning, but it's responsible for roads maintenance. It's responsible for school place planning, but not for what actually happens in the schools. And the vast majority of the County Council's budget is spent on social care, so care of elderly people, which is when that's outside the NHS, and a lot of it on children's social care and care for people who have learning disabilities or for other reasons are not able to look after themselves. So actually a huge part of the County Council's budget is spent on that area of work, which is as we've been discovering during the pandemic, one of the areas of the county, of the whole country's health system, which is very fragile and not very well organised or funded. In terms of how we would change things if we were running the County Council, one of the biggest things is that we would make reinvesting in Cambridgeshire our top priority. It's been very clear over the past 8 years that the top priority of the Conservatives is to make sure that they spend as little money as possible. And you can see some of the consequences of that in the standard of our roads, which I think is verging on the dangerous in some places, and certainly is one of the things. I mean, there are elderly people who are frightened to leave their houses because the pavements are so uneven and that it's really not good enough. So we would certainly be wanting to reinvest more in that. We would also be wanting to make sure that the County Council has a contract for its management of the road system with a company called Skanska. They have managed that contract very badly, so that quite a lot of the time they don't even know what they have been, which work has been done and which work has not been done. So, for example, things like clearing out drains. Once it's been asked of Skanska that they clear out the drain, it's then marked as having been cleared, even though often it hasn't. And there have been quite a lot of cases this winter where that's led to businesses and houses being flooded in different parts of Cambridgeshire because the drains weren't cleared and water has ended up in people's houses. So the way in which that contract is run and managed is certainly something that we would be wanting to improve. So it's not just about putting more money, it's also about making sure that it's better managed and organised. One of the other things that has changed a lot in the last 8 years is that the Conservatives have closed most of the children's centres and most of the youth centres across Cambridgeshire, which has made it very difficult for many families and young people to get the help and support that they need when they need it. And we've seen that tends to lead, in some cases at least, to people getting worse because they don't get support when they need it. So particularly for young people with mental health problems, because they can't get help and assistance anywhere until they've got, I mean, the number of cases that we've heard of where people go and ask for help and they're told, oh, you're just not bad enough. You don't reach the thresholds for needing support. And there is no support network for them until they get really ill. And that's not only incredibly bad for the young people and the families themselves, it also means that people come into the system with very serious and severe problems, which then it takes much more money to sort out. Whereas actually, if they got the support and the help that they needed at an earlier stage, you would hope that they would then need less intervention and less help later. So we are very keen to try and make sure that we can get community centres back up and running again, so that in every community there is somewhere where people can go to ask for help or to ask for some support or ask where to get some support at some point. I mean, we're not saying they would necessarily be open every day for everybody, but at some point during the week there would be somebody there. So if you were a young person and you were you needed support and you didn't want to go for support in school, because not all young people want to ask their teachers for support and not all young people want to ask their parents for support, there would be somebody there that you could trust and you could talk to. So that's a key issue that we feel that the cuts that have been brought in have been very unhelpful and actually led to a much worse level of service and increasing levels of mental health problems in young people. Climate change is a huge issue, I think, across all bits of government and actually for all of our lives. So that's something that we would want to be tackling much more rapidly at the County Council than has been the case in the past. The County Council is a huge landowner across Cambridgeshire, and I think it's there's been an enormous missed opportunity in thinking about how we can use that land holding to help tackle climate change and to help support a move in this area to being climate neutral. So that would be something that we would be looking at very hard. We would also be wanting to invest in making sure that our schools and a lot of the public sector buildings were much better insulated, and at the moment we're still putting gas boilers into schools and other major buildings, and which is actually in the long term not good for anybody. So that's something that we would need to look at. The final thing that I think I'm going to talk about is the need to bring local democracy and local decision making back down where people can understand it. The local government situation in Cambridgeshire is so complicated, and you have to really understand. It's very difficult to know who is responsible for different bits. So just as an example, if your drain is blocked because there are leaves on the surface, that's the City Council's responsibility because they haven't swept the roads. Whereas if it's blocked because the leaves have gone down the drain and blocked it underneath, that's the County Council's responsibility because we're responsible for the gully clearance underneath. And this kind of complexity is unhelpful to people knowing where decisions are made and feeling that they've got any kind of control over those decisions. So we would like to bring local decision, the County Council's decision making back to committees that would be run locally so that people can have a much greater say in where spending in their area goes and much more responsibility for things like library opening hours. And these community hubs that I was just talking about. So I think we also need to look at actually whether we've got the right structures in Cambridgeshire, but that's not something we could necessarily have full control over. That's a conversation that needs to happen with partner councils and possibly with government. Whereas the conversation, just deciding that we will make decisions about Cambridge in Cambridge is something that we can do and we could do quite quickly. Sorry, I've talked too much. That's enough from me. I hope we'll get some questions.
I enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Lucy. Yeah, I think we will leave the question to the quick Q&A time. Absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Shall I go next?
Yes, please.
Thanks. Good evening, everyone. It's lovely to meet you all, albeit not in person. I just want to start by saying thank you so much for having us and for organising this sequence of events. As you said, you've already spoken to the Labour candidates and the Conservative candidates. And I think we certainly really appreciate the time to be here to talk to you and answer your questions, but also to hear any of the issues I think that you would like to raise with us that perhaps your community face or that you feel are not yet being addressed in Cambridge and across the region by local government. And we're really keen this evening to hear what you have to say. As Lucy has referred to, Cambridge politics is incredibly complicated. And while this election is very exciting, as it gives the chance for complete change across the city, the county and the region, I think the complexity of that means it has been very difficult for people to make their minds up, because each position has different responsibilities and has a slightly different context behind it. So that's one of the reasons why I think we really appreciate being here to try and unpick that with you as well. So my name's Cheney Payne. I'm City Councillor in Castle Wards in Cambridge. I was elected in 2018. I first moved to Cambridge in 2012, which was to go to university at Murray Edwards College. And then just simply never left. I stayed around, so I know many people have also done. I did my teacher training at Fitzwilliam College a few years after that, and I'm still now a teacher at Linton Village College, which is just outside the city, so just in South Cambridgeshire, and I teach religious studies and philosophy and ethics alongside being a counsellor. One of my main roles within the council, within our Liberal Democrat group, is I'm the spokesperson for our communities work. And over the last year, that's been particularly interesting and challenging, as the main role we've been serving is to try and support our communities through the pandemic. It's been an incredible honour, actually, because we've been able to work with so many people across the city. And one of the first things we did when the pandemic began was we set up voluntary groups in each ward, voluntary mutual aid groups, to just provide, a service to help people run errands, to help with shopping, but also to provide a sort of friendly listening ear for people who are having a tough time. And then we're able to work with the county council and with different agencies for people who perhaps needed more support and also financial supports. And I think for us, this fresh new insight into our communities is one of the things which we would really like to change and like to do better if we do take control of the council in the elections on Thursday. Because the pandemic's really revealed to us the very different living situations which some people have in the city. Inequality is a huge issue in Cambridge, I'm sure all aware of that. And we often talk about the financial inequality, which certainly is a huge problem. But I think something we've seen over the last year has been that inequality actually is much broader than just that. There are many people who found suddenly that when they're not able to go into the office, they don't feel connected to the people they live alongside. They feel very lonely, very isolated. They maybe don't have access to open green space and places to exercise, and even to simply look at the health outcomes for the poorest areas of the city. It's clear that the life expectancy there is lower in the poorest areas of the city. So there's a real issue with inequality, which I think we need to unpick, and something which we would like to bring forward if we take control of the council on Thursday is a much broader way of looking at inequality across the city. So we'd like to bring forward a wellbeing strategy which goes beyond just the financial inequality, but instead looks at people's mental health, their well-being. Do they have a sense of job opportunities? Do they have a future in the city? And how do they see themselves taking their place here? Which is why I'm incredibly enthusiastic to support Aidan's work around apprenticeships. As for us here, I think that's a really important way to help local people stay in the city and see their pathway into employment and to be able to stay with us. One of the other areas which we would also like to see some change in, and where I feel that the Labour City Council have unfortunately really failed over the last 6 years where they've been in control, is with some of our basic services. So over the last couple of years, there have been some shocking revelations which suggest to us that the City Council have just taken their foot off the pedal. It was found about a year ago that 1 in 9 of our council houses actually fall below what's called the decent home standard, so considered not fit for people to live in. And that situation certainly hasn't got any better. We've got public toilets around the city being closed, which I know is a small thing, but actually I think is an equalities issue for women and for people with certain disabilities as well. And we've also seen things like the very knee-jerk closure of the Market Square, which caused a great deal of anxiety for people who wanted to shop out in the open air, which was done without any kind of consultation or working with local residents. So for us, I think we would like to really properly invest into getting the basics right of a council and making sure that our basic services are being delivered well, and that actually we're working with people who are experts in those areas. So our residents, our market traders, our local business people, to make sure that they're working with us, and therefore between us we can get things right. So we very much hope that on Thursday we do have some success, so we can start making our city an even better place for lots of us to live and work in.
Thank you very much. Okay, Anthony.
Thank you. So hi, my name's Anthony Martinelli. Thank you very much for inviting us this evening. So I'm a city councillor representing Market Ward, which encompasses the city centre, which is home to a great number of residents and of course a huge number of businesses which may be relevant to some members of your community also. I've been representing Market since 2018 and like my colleagues here, I'm standing for re-election on Thursday. In terms of my background, I'm a respiratory doctor at Addenbrooke's by profession, and I'm also doing a PhD on the biomedical campus in cell biology, which I've been doing for about 2 years on and off with various COVID-related sort of deployments and things. I'm currently in the Lib Dem group, the housing spokesperson, and my priorities for this really are threefold. Firstly, we know that Cambridge, the city, has an affordable housing crisis. It's very difficult for people that aren't from a wealthy background to afford to live here. And therefore, primarily, I feel that the council needs to be enabling the build of new affordable housing. And for us, that means developments in the northeast of the city in particular. We've talked about Marshall's Airfield and the sewage works, and we need to be building more houses there to bring down the overall price of housing in Cambridge. This housing that we're building needs to be sustainable and affordable. It needs to be in keeping with our goals of tackling the climate crisis, and it needs to be accessible for people that are not necessarily wealthy. So this could include, for example, key workers. So people that are working in those front-facing jobs which have been so critical over the last year. I guess the second strand of my housing manifesto for these elections would be maintaining the current homes the council operates with more efficiency and with greater care. So Councillor Payne Cheney has already mentioned about the discovery of a number of those homes being essentially not fit for purpose or not decent. This is despite the fact the council is actually not using all of the money it's budgeted for those council homes to repair them. So I think the council could certainly be doing a better job there, looking after its own tenants. We should really be an exemplary landlord. And finally, I think one of the things that comes up, particularly in my area, in Market, but also all across the city, is the growing problem of rough sleeping in Cambridge. So we see more and more people over the last 5 or 6 years homeless and living rough on the streets, and this creates obviously a great personal tragedy for the person involved, and also is associated with a number of other problems. And I think the way we need to tackle this is by providing a range of different housing options for these people, but also helping address the underlying causes of their homelessness or rough sleeping. And that could include things like helping with drug addiction or mental health problems in many cases. So aside from housing, I've obviously also maintained a real interest in air quality in the city. As a respiratory doctor, that's somewhat related to what I do at work. And I've been really keen over the last few years to try and take all steps as a council to improve that. We know that poor air quality has a huge impact on all kinds of health outcomes, really from birth until death. Whether we're talking about things like cancer or heart disease or strokes, they can all be worsened by air pollution. And what we need to be doing is improving our transport strategy, as Lucy and Aidan have already outlined, to get fewer polluting cars in the city. And we also need to be monitoring our air quality better and running campaigns to educate people on the dangers of poor air quality. So, for example, we don't want to see people leaving their engines running when they're in traffic. Finally, as a councillor for the city centre, representing a number of our great open spaces, places like Parker's Peace or Jesus Green, I'm really keen to see that those are maintained properly and safeguarded from threats, like, for example, the supposed mast that was going to be planned on Jesus Green, or losing the cows from grazing on the commons. These kind of things that make Cambridge a really nice place to live. So those are some of the things that I care about, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions.
Very much. Thank you, Aidan, Lucy, Cheney, Anthony. Thank you very much. I think our audience is eager to ask the question now. I would like to hand it over to Jinzhao Li. She's our member of executive committee in Cambridge Chinese Community Center, and she's also CEO of Cambridge Chinese Center. Now I would like welcome Jin Zhao. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sun Wei. Thank you, and thank you all the councillors, all the candidates, Lib Dem candidates for joining us tonight. It's a very interesting combination of candidates joining today. We have Lucy representing the County Council, and Cheney representing the City Council, and Aidan is the candidate for the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority, and Anthony the spokesman for the Cambridge Housing Council as well. So we have got some questions, and also we would like to hear more from the audience. So all our audience, please feel free to raise your hand if you have a question or you want to add on your opinion, or type your questions or concerns in the chat box. And so we'll, 我会抛砖引玉, in Chinese, 抛砖引玉 means I'll throw the brick, which will raise out some jade, some very nice things. So I'll ask a few questions and then we'll see what's coming up from the chat box. So the first question is, was mentioned by Cheney and by Lucy already, the complexity of the governing bodies. It's very difficult for you guys, it's very difficult to know who is responsible for what. City Council, County Council, and also there is a combined authority as well. So I look at Lib Dem's manifesto website page. It says you would like to see Lib Dem is calling for a unitary council, that the two main levels of local government combining into one. How can that be possible? Would you like to tell us more of your thoughts behind that?
Shall I talk on that, or do you want to go ahead? Okay, fine. So I think this is not something that is entirely just within one council's decision. That would need to be something that can be discussed between different councils. It already happens in lots of the country. There are lots. I mean, so Peterborough, for example, is already a unitary authority. So in Peterborough they just have one council, and that's responsible for all of the council services. And I do think that, I mean, certainly our Peterborough colleagues say that it's a much easier system to work under, because everybody knows who is responsible. It's Peterborough City Council and they have to deal with things. There are questions about, I mean, there is a whole range of complexity about where you would draw boundaries. I think that there would be quite a lot of people who would agree now that Peterborough City Council is quite small for a unitary council. That actually, if you're going to be responsible for social care and a lot of schools issues, that actually, as well as the transport system, you don't necessarily want a council which is too small. So probably Cambridge City would want to join up with some of its neighbours. Where you would draw those lines would be difficult and complicated. So and there are, I mean, there've been some conversations going on. There was a lot of discussion last summer about whether the government was going to be supporting or even putting pressure on councils to become unitary councils. As with a lot of other things, there seemed to be a lot of noises coming from government, but not very much action at all. So it's very difficult to know what their attitude towards that is going to be. But I do think it's something that the Liberal Democrats would like to see some progress on. One of the other things, though, is that even if it's not easy and it takes a while to do that, you can start to make those decisions happen by making committees where there are councillors who sit together to make committees as a group. And that used to happen on the City Council on roads matters, but the Conservatives abolished the committee that did that, which I think was, there used to be county councillors and city councillors sitting together to make decisions about roads issues in Cambridge, which was really helpful, and I think it was very positive, and I think it's very sad that that's disappeared. I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything on that topic.
Could I just mention one of the, I completely agree with everything Lucy has said, and one of the most frustrating things I'm sure all four of us here have experienced as councillors is when residents come forward and say, the classic one is there's a huge pothole and you then have to point them towards the county council and have no way in to try and solve it for them. So it does often end up meaning people have to go round and round the houses to try and find the solution to the issues that they have. And that's one of the key reasons why we would really like to explore the concept of a unitary authority, just to simplify that, and so there's very clear accountability. People, I think, often, and are quite rightly, very frustrated when the response from councillors of all different types is, oh, it's somebody else's problem to fix. And it shouldn't be that way. It should be transparent, it should be clear, and it should be accessible. I think one of the other issues which comes with our current system in Cambridge is just how frequently we have elections. So we have local elections every single year in Cambridge. And that means that, no sooner have you got yourself elected and found the Guildhall and been given your card pass, you're suddenly campaigning for election again for somebody else in your ward. And I think this really risks leading towards quite knee-jerk politics, where it can be very tempting for people who want to keep their seats or help their colleagues keep their seats to go in for very small wins early on and make small changes just so they can say they have done something when the next elections come round. And it then limits the ability, I think, of councillors to work on long-term projects and see change over time. If you know you have a 4-year term, there's a lot more you can achieve within that, and you have the chance to properly consult with people and work on larger projects that have a real impact. So I think one of the other reasons we'd be interested in exploring different models of how the council works is to avoid that kind of constant set of elections, which must frankly be exhausting for the public to have all the leaflets coming through the doors as well, I'd imagine.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Cheney. It is like from the 2 previous meetings with the Labour and Conservative, really all our audience were amazed or shocked by people saying, oh, the Labour City Council says it's all the County Council's fault, which is Conservative. And the Conservative said, oh, and also they will say, oh, we don't like what the Combined Authority does. And the current mayor is a Conservative and they have wasted lots of money. And the metro system is not happening yet. Really, for normal people, for residents, we care about life quality. Things can be done without hassle. So really, it will be great to have some cross-party and really government levels collaboration, make life a lot easier. That would be great. We would like to see more of those little improvements day by day. So from 2 previous meetings, we got lots of questions, and nearly half of them are about road situations, conditions, and traffic. So one statistic says Cambridge is one of the most congested cities in the UK, and before pandemic in 2019, people spent on average about 71 hours sitting in traffic in 2019. And from the Lib Dems Manifesto 2021, I see you would like to work through the Greater Cambridge Partnership for a low traffic city. I'm sure all our audience would like to know more about this low traffic city plan. What's included? Aidan, please.
Yes. So, yeah, as you say, the congestion, I mean, it's not so bad at the moment, but it's going to come back very, very quickly to the levels I'm sure that it was 18 months ago. And it is having an impact now on people's ability to get to work and the attractiveness of Cambridge as a place for business. There were various things that sort of ideas around for what we can do about it. I mean, coming back to your point previously about blaming the other parties, I mean, the truth is that transport is mainly controlled by the county council and the combined authority, but which are both Conservative, and it's not more than just sort of saying. So 18 months ago, with the Greater Cambridge Partnership, we were advancing looking at all of the ways that we could deal with congestion in Cambridge in a sort of open way, considering everything from increasing parking charges to workplace parking levies to road closures to congestion charges. And the Conservatives effectively blocked progress on that, mainly because they just don't like the idea of any sort of extra charges for driving anywhere. So it's a sort of ideological thing, but clearly there's 2 problems. One is the number of cars in roads where roads are too small for them, and the other is the lack of good public transport that can be more attractive than the cars. So you've got the which needs paying for. So there does need to be revenue, and there does need to be in investment, and there does need to be some measures that reduce the numbers of cars in there. Obviously, and we started doing the work about looking at the impacts of that, because obviously you can't be having measures that make it more difficult for cars or charge cars in some way, if that is going to have an impact. Firstly, on business, the ability of businesses to do their work, and secondly, on the sort of finances, in particular the lower paid people who do depend on their cars to get to work. So there's a lot of work to do still to get a system that is fair, both for businesses and for especially lower paid people who often work different hours and find it more difficult to use public transport. But if you do make that change, you're also getting the benefit of having this the term we use as a low traffic city, where it is just more pleasant for people. People enjoy it. So we had about a little bit less than 2 years ago, we had a citizens' assembly where there's a random selection of people from across the area looking at what we can do about transport. And one of the results they come up with is that we do need to have less cars in the city centres where the people are, so you can have other forms of transport, cycling, and as well as public transport. Alongside that, there is also going to need to be investment in public transport, some form of really good quality transit system to get across Cambridge and beyond. It's still all up in the air, despite what James might say. He's effectively starting from scratch in it with it. But the system with buses, with tunnels and autonomous vehicles, isn't going to happen for 10, 15 years at least. But there are options that we can do now, which is things on the surface, whether it's a sort of light rail tram type system that they're looking at in Coventry, which is more suitable for Cambridge than other sorts of tram systems, or some other sort of system with rubber tires, but that is really good quality and that actually attracts people out of their cars. So it's giving people good, attractive alternatives to cars, and then reimagining how we can use the city centre.
Thank you, Aidan. And the current mayor, James Palmer, says that the autonomous metro system might be happening around 2030. It sounds like you don't agree with him.
I think, no, I think that's just implausible. He's not shown any evidence for that. I've been in several meetings and asked him to set out the timetable for getting there, and he's never done that. It's always about to come. And so we've been in that situation for the last 4 years. And I just don't think it's credible for to come out with those sorts of dates.
May I ask you some question, just following the thread? If you elected as mayor, are you going to script whatever James has done and the money he has spent? That's one of the concerns many people have. And another thing is, because the current government is from Conservative, so they may be easier to get fundings from the government. So I think that's two concerns, as far as I know, about your mayorship.
They're very, very good points. I mean, the truth is that James Palmer has an extremely bad relationship with government. 2 months ago, he got a letter about the housing saying that he wasn't doing it quickly enough and not giving O'Reilly for money, and was having £45 million of the housing money withheld. Last year, he had another letter from a different minister with a list of criticisms of how he was running the combined authority. He has been constantly saying that he needs government support to do CAM, and there's never been any indication of government support to do CAM. So he might be the same colour, but I don't think it necessarily means he's going to be more successful. I mean, Andy Burnham in Manchester is able to deliver improvements to the transport system in Manchester while being a different colour. It's more about the approach and the attitude. I'm not interested in fighting the government on things that we can do together. The mayor is there to work together for the good of the whole area. In terms of the money that's been spent so far, some of it has already been wasted because they're starting from scratch with the concept designs and the plans. So some of the work will feed into potential future system, but I mean, again, from what I can tell, because he's not very good at sharing the information, that there has been a lot of waste so far, and it's just been very inefficiently done. I mean, we'd have to see what we can salvage. I'm not interested in just chucking it away because it's not, because it's a different, I'm a different party. It's because it is the wrong thing, and it isn't going to, it's too risky, and it's not going to get us what we need.
Can I just follow up on that very quickly, to say that the point that Aidan makes about the lack of trust from central government in James Palmer personally is very clear and has been for a while. Just to add to the letters that they've sent expressing concern over the way he runs the combined authority, another has been sent saying that he needs to appoint a permanent chief executive, because the combined authority hasn't had a permanent chief executive for over 2 years now. And before that, it had a sequence of resignations from the chief financial officers. And there's real concern in central government about the way in which he manages the combined authority and its failure to deliver on any of its promises. And CAM is one of those. The other thing I'd like to say about the spending and the work that's been done on CAM so far, there has been a huge amount of money already wasted on the CAM project by James Palmer, because he keeps changing his mind about what he wants. And the Camborne to Cambridge section is a really clear example of that, in that he said he wanted one thing, and then now he's changed it and says he's looking at something different. But the route for that something different is still just a kind of vague shading colour, enormously vague on a map, and it's very, very unclear what he does actually want. The organisation which has been trying to work around this is the Greater Cambridge Partnership, which actually is an organisation which is led by Cambridge City Council, South Cambs District Council and the County Council, all of which, so that's one led by Labour, one led by Liberal Democrats and one led by the Conservatives at the County Council at the moment. Because they're all there represented in the same body, they are busy trying to work out how to function together in this environment. And it's actually quite a good example of parties having to work together in order to find solutions. And while it's been quite difficult, they have made progress on some of the routes for CAM, and that work will not be wasted because it's kind of built into it that it can be used for other things until the rest of the CAM network comes along. So that it's sort of being planned for now with an eye to what it might be used for in the future. And I think that probably is not a bad way of, I mean, it's not necessarily an ideal way of planning a transport network, but it's not it means that some of the work that's been done would not be wasted, whatever the future of that project looks like. But James Palmer's, he's already had about 3 different at least 2 different versions of CAM, and each one costs a huge amount because of all the work that consultants do on planning it.
Thank you, Aidan. Thank you, Lucy. Either a tunnel system, metro system, or guided bus system. So we would like to see the traffic really calmed, or as good as during the pandemic when things get back to normal. So that will be something we people would like to see. Okay. Next, I would like to ask Dr. Anthony a housing question. From one of the YouTube video clips Anthony made, and you mentioned that Cambridge has a housing crisis. What do you mean by Cambridge has a housing crisis? Would you like to tell us more?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think essentially what I mean by that is that the majority of people that work here, owning a house in Cambridge is not so much difficult as essentially a dream, impossible. And I think that's really damaging to the fabric of our society, because it means that people that work here have a slightly lower stake potentially in the community and its economy, which I think in the long term is damaging. And this manifests in other ways as well. It means conditions. People can be tied to renting, perhaps sometimes under poor conditions. It means that people can be at risk of homelessness at the extreme end and ending up sleeping on the streets, as sort of discussed a little bit earlier on. So that's essentially what I mean, is that the rate of house price growth within Cambridge is vastly greater than the rate of, say, wage increase or something like that, and that shows no sign of improving. And
we have Yan in the chat box also asking because Cambridge is such a famous university town, like you said, investment return from renting is good, better than the increase on salaries. How do you balance such conflicts, and what measures would you like to impose? That's a question from Yan.
Yes, thank you. I think it's a really interesting question. Yeah, and absolutely right. Cambridge is a very attractive place for buy-to-let for the reasons that you outline. I think fundamentally it does all come down to the kind of issues of supply and demand. And at the moment there is a huge amount of demand and relatively constrained supply of housing, which fuels the situation you described. I mean, our hope is to do what we can as a council to adjust that balance and make sure that the supply increases to mitigate those effects. I think in particular, one of the ways to help address that kind of conflict that you described is by building or by instituting a diversity of possible housing options. So not only houses that will eventually end up being rented in the private sector, but also houses that will be run by the council as council homes, and also houses that will be run by the council as key worker houses via a slightly separate sort of scheme. I'm also really interested in this idea of build to rent, which has come up quite recently, where essentially you develop houses that are designed to be let out by a professional company for the lifetime of their existence. And the advantage of that, it means you get a more European style model of professional landlordism, which has potentially many advantages. So that means that perhaps people that don't want to buy a house could pursue something like that. So I guess those would be the ways I would be thinking about influencing the housing market within the city. But it is a hugely complex area, and we're obviously always grateful to consider new thoughts and new options.
Thank you. And at the beginning, when Anthony introduced yourself, you mentioned that one of the solutions is to build more houses, particularly in the northeast of Cambridge. But I would like to raise a question that mentioned by Fei Yang the other day. Fei Yang lives in Northstowe, northwest of Cambridge, about 5 miles away. When completed, Northstowe will eventually have up to 10,000 houses. Now it's getting quite busy already, but the problem is there have been next to none community facilities so far, and also the fee transportation from Northstowe to Cambridge by guided busway is about £8 per day. It's more expensive than driving in and driving out. So what's the solutions really making people's life pleasant and easier by living in big town, satellite town like this? And would that be same problems if building more houses on the northeast of Cambridge?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to be clear, within the northeast is should mostly be within the city boundaries, but primarily I think what we're talking about here is the need to connect up these communities with existing transport networks, and I think that's absolutely critical. So that includes particularly active transport. So we need people to be able to cycle from the northeast of Cambridge to their job at AstraZeneca on the Science Park, or down to the biomedical campus or into the city centre, and to do that easily. And that's how we address things like congestion, how we address things like the housing crisis, how we address things like the climate crisis, all in one, by building sustainable new communities in the city. Absolutely right about the need to connect up those communities growing outside of Cambridgeshire, outside of Cambridge City, but in South Cambridgeshire in general, by the kind of transport systems and methods we've been discussing. I completely agree that at the moment a lot of the problem is that people move outside the city where the houses are slightly less expensive, but find they are reliant on cars or poor public transport to get in and out, and that's absolutely what we'd be trying to fix if we were in control of the combined authority or the county council. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Do you mind if I just add something specifically about Northstowe, because it is a very good question, and I'm interested in what other answers you got, because so Northstowe is in South Cambridgeshire area, and so as I said, I'm the deputy leader of the district council, which is run by the Liberal Democrats. We just I think maybe 2 months ago, for the phase 1 of Northstowe, the north part, because the developers were not delivering the community infrastructure, the community facilities quickly enough and in a way that was sort of working for the communities that were developing in North Stowe, we bought that land as well as buying the enterprise zone in North Stowe to develop it ourselves. It is financially worth our while to do so because there is a housing element there, but that means that we can shape the community facilities to the needs of the community, working with people in a way that a developer just wouldn't have the incentive to. So that's a good example of where a local authority can really get the best out of something in a way that sometimes the private sector doesn't work as well. And the cost of the buses is another example of that. The prices on the busway are set by the bus operators without control, and we need to have more direct local control of the bus services, including on the busway, so that we can control the prices, integrate tickets. I mean, one of the problems, for example, is if you want to change buses or change from a bus to a train, it just doubles the cost. I mean, you don't get that sort of full integration. So that it is like the whole problem, as Anthony was saying, as I said previously, we need to make alternatives to the car more attractive, so that people who can use the bus, use a bike, do so, and then it is easier and less polluting for those people who do need to use their motor vehicles, electric vehicles, as they will be.
Can I add one more sentence on that bus thing, which is that actually the ability to persuade and in certain circumstances force bus companies to reduce their fares or cross-subsidise or have a much more kind of constructive conversation is something that lies within the power of the mayor. It's just that James Palmer has absolutely not taken any interest in using it. There are other combined authority or other authorities around the country who have got really involved in conversations with their bus companies about how those services can be improved and how they can make the fares cheaper. James Palmer has chosen not to.
Thank you, Aidan. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Anthony. Yes, the bus is another really hot topic that people are talking about, because that really affecting many people's daily life. Yeah, we'll see. Great to see some coordination, some improvements in that area. In the chat box, Cindy has a question to Cheney. Cindy says, my friends worry about going to the polling station. Would it be safe? And they heard that the Labour and Conservative will not do the telling, so that it's safer to the voters. Telling here means asking people for the vote numbers, so you can tell who has already voted. I'm not quite sure whether you can respond to Cindy.
Absolutely, thank you for that, Cindy. So the reason, just to explain the reason telling is very important in elections, I think we will often wonder why these people sit outside polling stations. It's because as we go through the day, it means that simply the local parties, know who has remembered to go and vote. The turnout in local elections is always very low. In most wards in Cambridge, it's only about 30%, which is a real shame that so few people get involved. And I think it's simply because it slips down people's radars. So the reason most parties normally have telling happening outside polling stations is that as we go throughout the day, we know who's voted, but also who hasn't. So our canvassers can pop round to them, knock on the door and just say, oh, you do know it's today, and remind them to head off and make sure they can get there without problems. We've been in quite close consultation with the electoral services in Cambridge and with the Guildhall and with the council officers. And before Labour and the Conservatives made their announcement they weren't going to be telling, the electoral services actually drawn up a full risk assessment of what telling would look like, so that it could be done safely. And in their judgment, they are very happy that polling stations have been made safe. The situation with telling is that our tellers will always sit outside the building. They'll be sitting way back from the doors. They'll always be at least 2 meters away from people. And we've also asked our tellers to wear a face mask, and we're making sure that they have them before they go there, and to use hand sanitizer. And there should be, I mean, there never should be any way of tellers kind of coming into close contact with people going to vote anyway. It's simply a question of the number from the polling cards. So we are intending to be telling on Thursday. Obviously, if people don't want to talk to our tellers, then they are very welcome to do that and to walk by, and our tellers will completely respect that. But in our judgment, bearing in mind that it's outside, that will be wearing masks, it's fully risk assessed. We're quite reassured it is safe. And I think in some ways, actually, I would rather someone told us in the open air that they have voted and therefore we don't bother them again, than we end up on their doors later on that day, which just present a slightly higher level of risk. So I think for us, we're very keen to make sure people access democracy and are reminded to vote, and telling is a critical part of that so that we don't disturb people later on. So we will be there, but I also would really reassure people that the polling stations have done a great deal of work to make sure that they are safe and they're secure. I'd remind everyone to take along their own pen or pencil to complete the ballot papers as is being requested, but please do feel reassured that it should feel very, very safe for you.
Thank you. I hope Cindy is happy with that response. Thank you. Aidan, you want to add on anything before we go to next question? Okay. Okay, so next question is about community. So Cheney and a few other candidates mentioned that we want to have a stronger and fairer community. Dr. Sun Wei at the very beginning mentioned that Cambridge is called the Chinese capital of the UK. That's in 2017, around Chinese New Year, but that's quoted based on the census 2011. That's about 10 years ago. So now the number should be nearly doubled. It will be 8,000 or more Chinese community in Cambridge. So we would like to know whether Lib Dems has any further thoughts or plans to better support the minority groups like Chinese community, and how to better support Chinese community, who is a big portion of the minority groups in Cambridge.
Can I say a little bit first? And I don't know if anyone wants to chip in with some other ideas following on. I think
I was going to interrupt you to say that I did ask the Chinese people to become members of our party and get elected. We have a couple of people who are interested, but we're very open to minorities groups to come and join us and get elected. Thank you.
Well done, George.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, absolutely, totally. Please do come and join us. We'd love to meet you. I think one thing I'd say is that would be really, really interested to hear the concerns and the issues that your community faces specifically. And I know that reaching out to our different ethnic minority communities is something which we always need to work to improve on. We were doing some of that work during the pandemic as well, with our Muslim community, for example. Many members of our Muslim community reporting that going to the food banks, they were finding it very difficult to access them, as sometimes the signage, their English wasn't quite able to read the different signage, and also they weren't reassured what was inside the food, whether it would fit their dietary requirements, and whether they'd have to spend a long time there during a pandemic trying to work out what they could eat. So we've been working closely with the Cambridge Ethnic Minority Forum, first of all, to try and solve some of those issues. And we'd be really interested to work on the same with the Chinese community in Cambridge as well. Something which we're very keen to bring forward from May the 6th is a survey across the city, so that we can ask people what the different issues that they face are. And we know that working with local community groups is the best way to make sure those things are promoted to specific communities. So if we're able to come back to you after May the 6th, once we know what happens, to maybe talk to you a bit more about how we can help and support, we'd be really keen. We're really keen to do that.
Thank you, Cheney. And in the chat box from Zhang, she or he mentions that in addition to local matter, can MP voice to state level on behalf of Cambridge community? Very interesting point here is most recently Asian communities, for example, Chinese, have been hurt, has been hurt badly due to our foreign policies misleading the public, which is further worsened by the media like BBC biased coverage from media. What's your idea to deal with this kind of business? I think it's really the increased tense, political tense between Asian countries, particular Chinese with the Western. And also, I think one of the concern of the community is hate crimes. So really, there has been seeing more hate Asian crimes since the COVID-19. So what's your view on this, really, how to make people feel safe going out by themselves or with their children, young children, feeling safe around the communities? Aidan, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you've got these sort of international tensions happening, or and again, there's, like the question implies, that there's different perspectives on these things. It's really important for us at a local level to ensure that these do not translate into problems between communities or within communities here. And some of the things that Cheney was talking about are really vital there. And as George said, representation and visibility is absolutely vital. I mean, we're very lucky in South Cambridgeshire, for example, to have a ethnic Chinese councillor, a Nigerian councillor, as well as sort of a range of people from different parts of England. So that means that the voices of minorities and different groups are present, and then when issues do come up, we can address them quickly. And the hate crime, which I understand has been increasing since the start of the pandemic, I think is a good illustration of that. We can address misunderstandings about that, so we do a lot of communication around, for example, around the public health and other forms of council communications, emphasising the reality of this, as sort of countering misinformation in the way that the question described. And we are doing that as Liberal Democrats across party. At a national level, there's a sort of COVID anti-race hate group that we're part of. And then I mean, we had it as well back during Brexit, when there was a lot of reaction to Eastern Europeans, and again, we're being vocally standing up to that. I think it's really important, our responsibility at local level to do that.
Can I chip in with something else as well? I absolutely agree with everything that Aidan's just said. But the other thing I wanted to add was that I think that the cuts to community services and things like children's centres have also made it more difficult for people to become part of the community in which they live. So when I first moved to Cambridge about 14 years ago, I had a 6-month-old baby, and I started going to and then running our local toddler group. And that was a really, really important way for me to get to know other people in the community who were in the same position, who had young children. And as I ran the toddler group, there were a number of Chinese and other ethnic minority mums who came to that toddler group and got to know other young mums in their area. In the last 8 years, a huge number of those services and those types of community centre and community activity have disappeared. And those are things that we need to rebuild, because it's that relationship with your community that makes people feel safe. It's kind of knowing other people, knowing your neighbours, and them knowing you not just as somebody who's different, but also as somebody who's the same, and who has the same problems and the same concerns. And we've lost an awful lot of that, and it needs rebuilding and reinvesting in Cambridgeshire.
Just say something as well. Regarding hate crimes, Dr. Weyer, I remember he brought this to me, and we in council have given full support to the Chinese community publicly, as well as seeing him in private. But being a member of a minority group myself, I can say that the Liberal Democrats care for every single person that works in Cambridge. It doesn't matter where you come from. Each and every one of us who lives in Cambridge and works in Cambridge matters. And they believe we're all important into carrying on with the ongoing success of Cambridge. So I like to reassure the Chinese community, as a person who knows them very well, that the Liberal Democrats will support the Chinese community without fail. Thank you.
Thank you, Aidan. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, George. I think Dr. Sun Wei has a question as well.
Oh, thank you very much. I just saw Dr. Su Li has raised his hand, so I'd like to invite him to ask his question first.
Hi, thank you. I'm glad we're coming to these ethnic issues. Unfortunately, rather late. I think the question, the topics you talk about early on about housing and traffic, community centers and schools, all very important. But I think that's important for everyone, not quite specific to this Chinese community. Of course, we want better house, we want better sort of road and everything. I think the reason you're here, you want to talk to us, and you want to, of course, you're here, you want to know what the particular demand and questions we have as a Chinese community. And we're very happy to tell you. But I think the problem is ethnic minorities or any disadvantaged group is we don't want to tell you what to do. We don't want to tell you the problem because we know everything, we know the problem. What I really want to know is the authorities and the parties know what we want, know the problem. So rather than we have to tell every single thing. So I really want to hear, this is a question for all four of you. I really want to hear from each one of you, what do you think our community, the Chinese community, want? What is the most important thing we want to solve? And what can you bring onto our table? Otherwise, how you want to persuade me to come and support you in the election? Rather than I'm here telling you this, that problem. Is my question.
I suspect that's an extremely difficult question because I'm not sure that all the Chinese people in this meeting, and certainly all the Chinese people across Cambridgeshire, won't have the same issue as their top concern. I'm sure there are some common ones, and I'm sure that some of the language that's been used in politics recently, and particularly the anti-China sentiment that there's been expressed in some parts of the press recently, is likely to be a common concern among the Chinese community. But I'm sure that there are other concerns that other members have that would be just as serious. On that issue of the way in which the national press talk about the Chinese community and the way in which China is now viewed, and that's changed quite a lot just in the past few years. It's not very long ago that China was viewed as the partner that everybody wanted to do business with, and China was seen as a kind of a very attractive place for business, and that there was a much warmer relationship. I hope very much that warmer relationship will return, and I'm sure that everybody, all the Liberal Democrats here, would hope that, because I think that living in a world where different nations collaborate and cooperate together in a constructive way is much healthier and safer and more profitable for us all. I think as local politicians, there's only so much that we can do about that, but we can certainly make it clear that that is our desire, and that we feel that, I suppose one of the things that we can do as local politicians is to be very clear that we are very welcoming of all communities and all immigrants, which is not something that is always said certainly by the Conservatives at the moment. I think that is an important thing that as local politicians we can make very clear, and certainly is something that the Liberal Democrats are very clear about. I don't know if other people, I'm sure other people have other things to add, and I would really, really like to hear from other people on this call about what their top asks from the Chinese community would be, other than the one that I've guessed at.
Yeah, I mean, I think all I was going to say was that, you know, I absolutely appreciate the premise of the question, which is that it's not the job of the Cambridge Chinese Community Forum to you know, always be having to tell us things. I think you're absolutely right that, you know, it's incumbent on all of us as elected representatives to be finding that out for ourselves. I'm sure, you know, I imagine it must get very tiring having to tell people constantly, you know, your own lived experience. But so I completely understand that. I think what I would say is that, I guess, I would agree with Lucy that not everyone's number one concern is going to be the same. And I guess what I think about is perhaps the 3 or 4 most recent people I've knocked on their doors who have happened to be Chinese. And obviously we do a lot of door knocking around the city and speak to a number of people from all kinds of backgrounds. And thinking of the last few Chinese people that I can recall speaking to, I mean, they had different concerns. I mean, one was very concerned about the state of the buses. Another was very concerned about crime in particular in the city. And another one was mainly about issues with their council house. So this is just off the top of my head of sort of my encounters on the doorstep. So I absolutely agree that I can imagine the sort of the questions in the chat and that have been alluded to so far about sort of deep discrimination faced by the community is a big one. But I think beyond that, the different roles that the local council have will affect different people in different ways, and that's absolutely what we should be working to try and fix alongside the bigger issues. So I guess that would be my thoughts on that question anyway.
Cheney, go first, Cheney.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Aidan. No, thank you for the question. It's certainly a good one that's got us all thinking. Can I just say 2 things? I think, you know, as has been said, I don't want to be in a position where I'm trying to guess what's at the forefront of your minds, as I think that's not a principle I feel comfortable with, of trying to vocalise your concerns from my perception of them, as I'm most likely to be wrong and not represent them properly. But just some sort of, I think, 2 quite different perspectives, if you don't mind me putting 2 things together. Within my ward, we have the Eddington development, which is quite a new build, and a large proportion of that is housing which is ring-fenced to members of staff at Cambridge University. And I would say that within the ward, if there is one area where the greatest proportion of Chinese people live at the moment, it is in Eddington. And some of the concerns which people there vocalise to me is feeling integrated into the wider community. And Eddington is quite a unique development, as people there will have a very similar job. So it's in some senses a bit of a company town. But within Eddington, we've been working really hard to make sure there is a sense of community there, and that the new people who are arriving are able to get to know and meet with the people who've lived there for years and years and years. So I think as we build new developments in particular, and this is a wider issue, of course, than for just the Chinese community, but for any people moving to a new town, making sure we build new developments that have communities in mind. It's taken absolutely years and years for a coffee shop to arrive into Eddington. We're still waiting on any kind of restaurant or place to eat or place to socialise in the evening. And it's made it very hard for people there to socialise. And if you don't already have a community base, reaching out beyond the development you live in has been very hard. So I think we need to work on making sure there are community spaces that are accessible to all and that cater to a range of different interests, hobbies and ethnicities are there right from the very outset. On a slightly different note, and speaking not so much as a politician, as this is much more of a national political issue than a city council one, but in my day job, as I said, I'm a teacher. And I've heard even at school, even from amongst my students who are aged between 11 and 16, some of the language they've used since the start of the coronavirus pandemic, which has been absolutely shocking. And as referred to earlier on, partly it's drawn from the media and has been, I can't call it anything other than racist, really. And I think there's a real issue within education about making sure that we are teaching people about different cultures, about being open, about respecting equality, and about calling out racism when they hear it. And I try to do that as an individual. But within the school curriculum, the demands of English, maths and science and the English baccalaureate are so rigorous that any other personal, social and health education has often been squeezed out. And I think as the media grows and can be incredibly toxic in the kind of language it uses, there's a real challenge for our young people to know how to unpick that and how to note bias and how to know how to respond to things like that when they see them. So for me, it's a much broader issue than I think any of us here could achieve, sadly, within our different roles. But ensuring that education is fit for purpose and helps people learn about the rest of the world that they live in, and what equality actually looks like, for me, would be an absolutely key issue going forward.
Sort of, by taking it, I'll give a sort of slightly more high level response, because I think you've got some sort of good examples so far. So for any group, that it's so important to have you feel like you have your voice, culture, your place in society is valued, and that in particular means a sort of sense of having sort of power and influence over what's happening in your lives, and participating in decision making. Obviously, that can happen in a variety of ways. One is actual direct representation, as in having councillors, for example. But I think doing what we're doing now and maintaining this dialogue, I think, is vital. I mean, the question was what we think, so we can give our take. Then your view on what we said would be really interesting, and then having that exchange is going to be the most productive way that we could address your concerns, support the whole the Chinese community in its variety as best we can.
So thank you. I think I just want to say last thing about why I'm asking this question. So taking this analogy of, say, if I choosing a leader from a local authority is a bit like choosing a partner. So I'm dating somebody, and there's a number of different people I can choose from. There's one person I have to tell him, I want this dress with this color, this pattern, this size. Would you buy it? And the other person would just buy it, the one I liked. And you can tell me which one I'm going to choose. So this is exactly why I'm asking that question. So I really want to hear what you say. Yeah, good. Thank you.
I'm very interested to know what you made of our answers.
I'll wait for that.
We will probably never know. That's the point. And actually, if this is a dialogue and this is supposed to be, I mean, it's tremendously useful for us to hear what you're thinking and what you. So having made us answer cold, as it were, can you now give us a little bit of your idea about what?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. I'm just conscious of time with 6 minutes left. I don't want to occupy the floor and talk too much myself. I just give one thing I found quite frustrating in the last couple of months during the pandemic. It's related to racism, related to the COVID-19. I think the problem I noticed is a lot of microaggression experienced. So of course you can't see through the screen. I'm actually quite a big guy. Bigger than most of the Chinese. So I wouldn't be afraid walking on the street, someone punch me on the face. But the problem I have is people will behave more aggressively in a manner they wouldn't normally do without the COVID-19 situation. And that's quite constant. And I mean, if I report this to authority, it will be way below the threshold of making anybody taking a notice, but that accumulates and that's noticeable. And that does make me very, very sad, very disappointing. So that microaggression, I think, something we have to solve at the top down, and with a strong political spin to change people's mind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just add something else again. If you're a foreigner coming to this country, there are various things that you want. If you're Chinese or Greek or Italian, you want access to education. You want the freedom to practice your customs, whether they're Greek customs, today is the Greek Easter, for example, or whether you're going to celebrate your Chinese New Year, which is sometime in February. If you're an entrepreneur and you want to start a business, you want the city to help you, to be understanding and to be treated equal. You want equality and to be treated equal by the people of Cambridge. We are very blessed in Cambridge. We have Dr. Weyer, who is a great leader. and he's the most organized. The Chinese is the most organized community that I have seen, better than the Greek, better than the Italians, better than the other ones. And you have been able to convey your concerns to all the politicians over the last 10 years. I've been a politician. You have been able to successfully convey your concerns, and we have been able to help you to resolve them. I am pretty sure you will be able to get solutions and resolutions to your problems this time also. Through Dr. Wey's approach, the Lib Dem councillors will resolve your problems, and we will be happy to help you.
Thank you, George. Thank you very much for all candidates. I just, I think it's 3 minutes. Okay, I just added a few words about these issues. I think as a community, the largest ethnic community, and some candidates has mentioned the most important thing is voice is heard. And one of the way to get the voice heard is we get our own candidates in the council, city council, or county council, but it's not happened now. I think that's not the only way, actually. And I think the feasible way is we get our communication channel opened. That's actually one of the purpose. We organize this kind of meetings, and we had a very good relationship with George before, and I hope this relationship will carry on with you guys. And I think it's very important. We can't just say, okay, if you want your voice heard, you need to get some counselor, your own counselor. I don't think that's the way forward. Yes, I'm not saying we shouldn't have all counselor. I always encourage everyone get involved, your local governments, and supporting care about your own business by giving your voice. But I think for politician, whatever politician, it's important to build community even without this person inside the community. I think that's what I expected we can get from you guys after you guys elected. I think we have quite a good communication channel with the city council, but with the county council, it's no channels, I think. I don't think anyone talk about the Chinese community in county councils. Yeah. That's my I don't know if I can call these questions, but my concern. Okay. I don't know if I have time to ask those quick questions. I have one question I don't fully understand. I live in Water Beach. My candidate is for Cambridgeshire County Council. So how's the relationship Cambridgeshire County Council and Cambridgeshire County Council?
That's back to the topic that we were at the beginning with the complexity of the different councils. So Cambridgeshire County Council covers an area that goes up as far as Wisbech and down as far as Duxford, across to Ely and St Neots in the other direction. So it covers a very, very large area, and within that large area, all of which is covered by Cambridgeshire County Council, there are 5 district councils, of which Cambridge City is one. If you live in Water Beach, you're actually in South Cambridgeshire District Council, which is the one that Aidan is the deputy leader for. So this year we have elections for all the Cambridgeshire county councillors. We shouldn't have elections at the same time for all the city councillors. That should have been last year, but they were delayed last year. So now we have them all kind of on top of each other.
But Water Beach has a district council by-election as well. So that's why
I know. So I think actually what I'm trying to ask it is, if I have some issue I'm not happy with, so for example, Lucy mentioned about the road repair, the contract, the management is long delayed. And actually, I don't know who I should blame to. South Cambridge County Council, Cambridge County Council.
So that is definitely the responsibility of Cambridgeshire. The potholes and the clearance of drains, all of that is the responsibility of Cambridgeshire County Council.
Okay then.
But if you go to a councillor and they say, oh no, it's somebody else's problem, it's nothing to do with me, then they're not doing their job properly, because they need to be, regardless of which council they're in, they need to be helping you as a resident to solve your problems.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll pass back to Jingzhou. Thank you.
I've done with all my questions. Thank you so much. So we have pre-received some questions, and most of them really are the key concerns of local residents, Chinese or non-Chinese. And thank you for all the answers. And it's great we have all the candidates representing different aspects, different government bodies, different levels. So that's very helpful. And I'm done all my questions, and I wish you all my best for the 6th of May.
Should we leave the final question to audience? Anyone wanted to ask any questions? We run over the time already, so I think probably we don't mind for one last questions. Does anyone has any questions?
I think commenting the question Dr. Suli just asked, I think that's concern for many Chinese as well, from either from work environment or from really neighborhood experience. And I have a friend, she lives in Cambridge with her young children, and her husband works in China. So she really lasts over a year or so. She doesn't feel too safe going out for jogging or just wandering around with the young children. So it's very, very unpleasant feeling. It shouldn't be happening at all in Cambridge in the UK. That's something really Lib Dems or other parties, whoever in control of the city council, county council, or supporting the local communities, we would like to see some more support and some improvements. So at least safety is the top priority for everything. So
I think that's a topic that we would really like to talk to you about after the elections, because I'm sure there are things that we can do to help support the Chinese community so that you're not facing that kind of discrimination and prejudice, and we would really like to be able to help with that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Lucy. I think I have an enjoyable evening. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Aidan, Lucy, Anthony, Cheney, and George. Thank you all our audience, and thank you, Jingzhou. Wish you all good luck in election.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
2 days away or 3 days away? 3 days away.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
Thank
thank you all
for organizing this meeting.
Future communications. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all audience. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
谢谢，谢谢。
Oh, George, you can speak some Chinese now.
Oh, absolutely.